University of Toledo cornerback Quinyon Mitchell. The 6 foot, 195-pound, 31-inch arm reach and nearly 76-inch wingspan corner who has definitely made some headways over the past few months. I mean, this is a guy who really climbed boards following the Senior Bowl, then going into that crazy combine performance where he put up a 4.33 40 with a 1.51 split, a 38-inch vertical and 122-inch broad jump. This is a guy that has had a lot of scouts talking big about him. Lance Zierlein saying that he's built like a running back, he tackles like a safety, and has the ball skills of a corner. And then Greg Cosell followed up in his evaluation and said, well, this is a guy with high-level traits that are desirable: size, length, speed, and physicality. Straightforward, he looks the part. And then, as he came out of the Senior Bowl, everybody began to know who this young man was because he did a few things that you didn't see on his film at Toledo. Number one, he was manning up on guys. He was actually showing you that he can carry down the field in man press situations, something we didn't see on his film from Toledo. So that was a big, big turning moment. All right, speaking of Toledo, what did his tape show us? A lot of off coverage, guys. As you can see, top of your screen, this is very much an off coverage situation here to where you're just reading. You're reading and you're reacting here. He's one of a handful of guys who can really read route progressions very well from this draft class. I mean, he's ranked up there pretty highly with the guys I've watched film on right now. This is something I see a lot of people who misunderstand in the comment sections where they don't get why guys are playing 10 yards off. They think sometimes this is a sign of weakness. Well, you can see Quinyon Mitchell, who's got very fluid hips. I'm just showing you back-to-back plays of this guy playing 10 yards off. You have to understand how quarters base coverages are conceived, the way that they actually add up, right? So you got a three-man route progression here, right? You got to know how these corners, how they work off of the 1, the 2, and the 3. Quinyon has that guy on the outside, which probably looks like he's playing a quarters concept with a man on deep if he goes deep. Anything short is his responsibility. The nickel cornerback looks like he's working 2 to 3 to me, right? He's guarding the hash. He really doesn't do the greatest job here, I'm not going to lie, guys. He's supposed to keep this guy from crossing his face on the hash, and he does very little to disrupt him on the hash. But then he should work back to the flat. And then you got your 3 receiver, which, basically that's safety, and then the apex guy. Those guys are working to see what happens in terms of the deeper route progressions. They're going to pick up the deep man that's kind of challenging the inside hash area. That's kind of their responsibility here. But I get a lot of comments from people who just don't quite understand the basis of quarters coverage, and I think sometimes they take it out on players when that's not what it is. I see a lot of things in terms of Toledo's film that it shows me that they have some very similar concepts to Vic Fangio. Now, this is not apples for apples. They both start off with a too high safety look. Looks like they both kind of work their way out of quarters in terms of the coverage shell. But I can tell you Toledo was a little bit more in terms of the off coverage. You didn't see a whole lot of press technique from Toledo. So whether that was running bail, whether that was running man match, whether that was running a jam technique, you didn't see a lot of press technique at Toledo within that quarters coverage. You saw a lot of off coverage. But like I said, luckily we were able to go to the Senior Bowl and kind of watch this young man play those techniques and show you he's got the ability to do this. Replacement blitzes is what I'm pretty much looking at here in this set, guys. I just want to see if he's coming on a whip, that whip pressure, weak side pressure, could he do it? When I'm reviewing Quinyon Mitchell, what I see is a guy that, it's all the traits, right? It's that height, it's the weight, it's the speed, it's the fluidity in the hips. He's a guy that I don't think he's quite to the Patrick Surtains. I don't think he's to the J.C. Horns. I don't think he's to like some of the top 10 corners we've seen in previous draft classes, Ahmad Sauce Garner, but he's pretty close. This kid has, I think, a lot of potential to develop. I think the only thing that was really lacking from his college film was you can make some nitpicky things about the competition, although I will throw out there, he played Isaiah Williams and Casey Washington from Illinois, both, guys that were over 600 yards, Isaiah Williams over 1,000 yards. And then he also played in 22 Ohio State, so he played JSN, and he played Marvin Harrison Jr., so competition, yes, for generally speaking, it wasn't the highest, but there were some things on his film there. He did play a couple of guys that were pretty dang good. In addition to that, though, I think what's really going to hurt him is, like I said, at Toledo, there wasn't a lot of press coverage that you could judge there. There wasn't a lot of man concept. So that kind of makes it a little difficult to evaluate him. I think he did himself a solid by showing up to the Senior Bowl and just showing he was the best athlete on the field. He was the best coverage guy at the Senior Bowl, bar none, and he was locking up some pretty big-time guys. So, I think that did him a lot of good in terms of pretty much getting himself on pace, getting himself in a position to be potentially the first corner off the board. I always caution people when they say, like, this guy be the first corner off the board. It's like, well, what team is drafting? What kind of system do they run? How does each individual player fit in the system? I think sometimes people can lose sight of that kind of stuff. But I will say Quinyon Mitchell afforded himself quite well on the film, guys. I mean, this is a young man that I think is a high caliber player. I will say that I did see some stuff with Marvin Harrison Jr. and JSN on the film to where, from 2022, you can see there were still some things to work on. I do think that they did create a little bit of space. I thought he got quite handsy with Marvin Harrison Jr. If I'm going to be honest, I thought there was definitely a couple of spots there to where in the NFL, those probably would have gotten called. There was definitely a little tug, a little pull there. With that said, though, man, I mean, this is a pretty dang good prospect. He's going to be a very, very highly selected guy. I definitely think he's one of these dudes that you can't put him in a certain category yet, but you can say that if everything hits about this young man, if he fully lives up to the potential, you're talking about one of the top potential defensive backs in the league. He's got that kind of skill set. It's just the consistency and then being able to judge this versus NFL receivers versus kind of lower level D1 players, if you will.